And here I am again making another video. It must be I'm feeling better, or it's a way of distracting myself, or after all I didn't sleep so well last night. Sometimes here I am talking to myself, and there you are, maybe listening, half listening, a little bit listening, maybe watching somewhat, or just listening. Okay, so yeah, I used to have a headmaster. You knew when he was coming. He would go, I think he had emphysema, and he would make his way onto the stage, and at the beginning of assembly, you'd always hear him coming. It was very, very loud, much louder than that noise. Or you could hear him on the campus, as it were, on the school grounds. You knew where he was. He'd go around on his bike and he'd go trying to clear his throat. A very nice guy. Anyway, yeah, so, it's very, very important for me. I made that last video just to remind myself it's very, very important for me to realize how much I've not been able to relax and to try to generate a capacity to relax. And last night I had a setback. It wasn't so terrible, but I had a bad dream and I woke up, and I had then further bad dreams and hormonal distress in my stomach region, lower, what's called the pelvis region. So that's where you get it, boys and girls. Actually, but wait till you're my age and you may get it. You may have that coming to you. It's very difficult. What I want to say, it's very difficult to convey anything, I think, of what I want to convey. This whole historical structure thing and personality development, very hard to portray it within a modern context, because the concepts that you have available to use are modern and apply to modernity, and they can give a wrong impression about what you're really talking about. And then you've got to say, well, I don't really mean that, but here's a concept that's a little bit close to what I mean. And then people invariably don't completely understand it, or they may totally misunderstand it, or they may partly understand it. But it is hard to indicate. This is what I'm indicating, what I'm trying anyway to indicate, is a very different structure of the mind, a very different structure of the psyche, very different structure of society. And it's not modern, and it's very far from any universal human structure, because I fear that the way people are taught nowadays in universities, the humanities, especially anthropology and social science and history, are not being taught. And any controversy or sense of real difference probably isn't being taught either. People are not used to confronting something that makes them uncomfortable or uncertain, or would even enable them to question what they know and what they don't know. So there's a sense in which, forgive me if I'm wrong, that the modern personality is very much overly self-assured. Call it cocksure, if we like. There is a brand of young male that tends to be along that line, and it tends to be very supported by certain social milieus. So it's, within certain social contexts, this young man that speaks up and speaks out without really having anything but a certain self-assurity, and unfounded at that, is deemed to be great and wonderful. I've noticed that within American culture. He's our future redeemer. He's the one. He believes in himself. May not have knowledge or may not have understanding, but he believes in himself. Let's support that. I think this is a trope, or it's more than a trope. It's a cultural attitude that comes from Christianity, which prevails to a large extent in America still. It's like the young boy, the small upstart. He will be the one. We've got to sacrifice it all for him. Bring him up, but allow him all the leeway in the world. Let him speak his mind. It's a sort of libertarian ideal, isn't it? The young, possible new inventor of the new situation for the internet. Not just an application, but more than that. He's going to invent something like Facebook or something. We better stand back and awe and just wait for it to happen. That aside, yeah, people really. What I said in my previous video, there were some good responses, but the logical response, in my view, and what's rational and what would be, in my view, socially normal, but then that's just my view, would be for people to say, oh, we didn't even understand that about the past or about you. How interesting. Can I ask a question? Because I know that there's a gap in my knowledge, and I'd like to know more. So that would be, in my view, a normative, rational, logical, socially advanced, emotionally emotionally detailed, emotionally integrated, emotionally logical, can we say? Let's not always separate emotion and logic. It would be a logical response in terms of how we need to process emotions and how we need to develop our understanding in a way that takes into consideration our current emotional ways and current emotional structure, and intends to expand beyond what we feel comfortable with. It's an issue of comfort, in other words. It's emotional logic, expanding beyond our comfort level, but people don't ask the questions. They don't say, oh, that surprises me. Things were really like that. It's funny, they don't ask the questions. And this thing, what I want to talk about is this situation where it's so difficult to convey something within modernity without tripping over the modern concepts and getting really mixed up in them in a way that muddies the issue rather than clarifies it, because people, well, not only do people not ask the question, but they presume that everybody thinks the same way. They presume that everybody uses concepts the same way. And in the end, the person that is like me, that's trying to convey something that's not from modernity originally, and has to use modern concepts to portray it, all I end up doing is portraying a more extreme or more bizarre version of modernity. And I can't really portray non-modernity because I've got to use the modern concepts. So they are right. Everybody has to use the same concepts. But if you use a concept that's not suited to what you want to say, you end up conveying something different from what you want to say. And you go, oh, that happened again. So we do need to speak a common language, but those who are brought up within the context of modernity and are attuned to it and inured to it, and have a language that speaks for the majority, which is them, they're just very comfortable. They can almost believe themselves the universal representation of humankind, because they never have any difficulty with language. It always just smoothly conveys or seamlessly conveys what they had in mind anyway. It conveys the logic of modernity and the types of people that appear conventionally within modernity. And it conveys the normative structure of modernity. And there is no problem with language. In my case, there is a problem, a very, very big problem with language. So I struggle with it and I struggle against it. And I really often don't seem to get my point across. And that, as I say, also has to do with people not being really that open-minded or willing to extend themselves beyond their comfort zone, because probably they feel, well, we have the universal human nature, and that's all we need. And there isn't really any other non-modern. There's no really non-us. In other words, there's just us. And everybody that communicates to us as us will be understood. And those who communicate to us as not us, well, they're just, maybe not worthwhile or incoherent, or we kind of partly understand them, but they communicate badly and they need to improve, or some kind of reflexive criticism tends to take place. uh, and so then I end up sort of portraying myself as this little kind of a little bit like a weakling or a wimpy character, and so on. And I used to think, well, that's not so bad. Now understand, I think I can convey the downside of colonialism. People are pretty receptive to that, but I can't convey this tough-mindedness that I've been brought up with, and that's also part of my psyche, because it's not part of modernity to say, well, there was another system that in some ways might have been better, although in some ways was obviously worse. Sort of, it's on the one hand this, on the other hand that. Modernity tends to look down on the past, very much down on colonialism, and with good reason in many ways, but not really understanding it, putting itself above it without understanding what it was really, how tough-minded you had to be to survive that situation, black or white, even the whites. And the image of the colonial white is that they just projected themselves onto a higher level, and they were not tough. They just got by because they're like the Eloi, the little tender little things. They just got by because they had the gunpowder, or they had the political power, but they weren't very tough. Well, that view, that very, very prejudiced view, well, it's actually just simply wrong as well. So yeah, I thought, well, I haven't really conveyed the tough-minded side of things, and really, I guess I can't. I feel like I am very tough-minded. I think that my survival, and given what I had to survive, could only have come about through a pretty tough-minded attitudes. The cultural schizoid, and that's a term that doesn't work really, does it? But nearest I can do to try and indicate what this colonial mindset was. They have. That part of it is an adaptation, part of it is being very tough-minded or getting along without a lot of emotional resources and actually just doing it anyway, surviving anyway. So you don't need to be very sociable or very very, very effective in socializing or attention seeking to survive, if you have that particular cultural schizoid mentality. You could, in a way, liken it to sickle cell anemia. It's a negative, but it has a positive adaptation, because the sickle cell anemia was a deficiency in the blood, actually a pathological condition of the blood in those many of the black slaves that were taken to America. However, they didn't succumb to a lot of things that those who didn't have it would have, because the deficiency in the blood made it so that they didn't generate a lot of oxygen. I think this is how it goes, and I'm not a biologist, and I just suddenly brought up this topic, and now I've caught myself unawares, so bear with me. But if you are attacked by something like malaria, I think it was a defense against that. So you would get a lot of oxygen produced in your blood, and then the oxygen causes oxygenation, which means you're more likely to die, because it's kind of like rusting up the blood. But if you had sickle cell anemia, you had a low-level immune reaction to it, and that meant less oxygenation, so you didn't die. It was actually beneficial in a paradoxical, unforeseen way. I suppose unforeseen, everything in biology, everything in evolution is unforeseen, but it has a result. It may be adaptive in many, many instances. And then, so the negative becomes a positive, and the lack of very refined, very gushy, very integrated. I'm using the word integrated. I like the concept of real maturity. It's my ideal. Real maturity is where you integrate your intellect with your emotion. and the colonials didn't. Okay, not so much. They had emotion, and it was a form of integration with the environment. That's where they integrated, but they didn't integrate with themselves. That was the absurdity. They didn't integrate their intellect with their own emotion. They integrated their intellect with the environment, and then their emotion with the environment, but didn't relate to themselves, didn't have any sense of, oh, this is Jennifer and she has self-awareness. Goodness me, imagine having self-awareness as a colonial. You don't have it. That's modern. That's a good feature of modernity. Um, but they had very tough-mindedness, and it was based on a kind of deficiency as well. This inability to emote made them tougher. My family are like that too. Hard to convey what they are in modernity, but they don't really emote, they don't really feel deeply. I think they kind of do and they kind of don't. They feel fear, they feel anxiety, but they don't relate it to anything. So it's a deficiency, but it's also an adaptation. They are pretty tough-minded in many ways, and I sometimes feel like they're like the mafia. In a way, the Portuguese mafia, if there were such a thing, because there's a strong Portuguese streak in our, in our culture, and I do believe, sorry, in our heritage, and I do believe that it's kind of genetic as well. I know that that seems to be an unpopular view, but that streak of soldiering and that streak of just toughing it out, and not feeling anything. I do believe that's a genetic strain. I mean, goodness me, you can see genetic characteristics in animals. Bull terrier is a little bit more, predictably this temperament or that temperament, and another fluffy dog like a poodle is predictably another temperament. So even though we are all humans, and that's the common factor, and makes us, it's the basis for a shared humanity and humanism. Even still, there are features that are a little bit different also genetically, and then there's also a cultural overlay, and cultural conditioning is huge. I really think a large part of who I am was cultural conditioning, but there's also, it seems, really a genetic streak of Portugueseism, and even in terms of my four siblings, those who look a little darker seem to have more of it in them, in their temperament as well. Sort of a little bit more robust, a little bit more resilient in some ways. We have a British streak, which is softer, and I sometimes feel I have a very soft streak in me, very British, very kind, very congenial, and I have this very hardline Portuguese streak in me, and they are very different characteristics indeed. I feel the Portuguese streak pushes me into extremes. Well, we can give it a different name. We can just say some random aspect of Jennifer or whatever, but there is something there, and there is something a little bit too tough-minded even for me, some hard taskmaster. But there's also a soft and gentle and congenial side, so go figure. I think people tend to see the one side and not the other, and then they are taken by surprise. I'm really not a weakling, but I can extend myself and extend myself and extend myself in a mode that seems pretty vulnerable and sometimes feels very vulnerable. But in the end, I know I'm not a weakling. I can pull myself out of most situations effectively because I can go to greater extremes than most people. And I think a large part of that is my ability to survive without that much emotional support or encouragement or association or groups or something like that. I have the ability to do more and to pursue more and to experiment with more, because I have that capacity for the desert, for the more extreme climbs. Anyway, so just philosophizing a little bit on different characteristics. The characteristics of modernity, they are different from mine noticeably, since I was brought up in a different culture, but somehow also have some very, very wild, very soldiering dimension to me in a way. Don't know if that's soldiering dimension is so much. It's kind of wild. It's a wild card. That's probably what I meant to say. It's very, very disciplined, actually. Unfortunately, very hard, very harsh. Um, so and yeah, it's just the fact that if modern people can't extend themselves into a danger zone and ask questions and make themselves a little bit uncomfortable, they'll never know about what else could exist or in fact does in fact exist outside of their general experience.